Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez had always been good at disappearing. Even in a crowded mess hall surrounded by 200 soldiers, she could make herself invisible. She chose the corner table, kept her head down, and ate her meals in silence while conversations flowed around her like water around a stone. Tonight was no different. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls of forward operating Base Meridian. Elena pushed her fork through the lukewarm mashed potatoes, her mind elsewhere. 3 months into her deployment in Afghanistan, she had perfected the art of being present but unseen. "Rodriguez, you coming to movie night?" Corporal Jenkins called from across the room. His voice carried the easy camaraderie that came naturally to some soldiers but had always eluded her. Elena looked up briefly, meeting his expectant gaze. "Maybe next time," she said, offering a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jenkins nodded and turned back to his friends, their laughter resuming as if she had never existed. She finished her meal in silence and walked back to her barracks. The evening air was cool against her skin, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat that had dominated the day. Stars scattered across the desert sky like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant. Elena paused for a moment to look up at them, remembering nights from her childhood when her grandmother would point out constellations from their back porch in New Mexico. "Mija," her grandmother used to say, "every star has a story. Some shine bright and bold, others glow quiet and steady. Both have their place in the sky." Elena had always felt like one of the quiet ones, steady but unremarkable. In high school, she had been the student who sat in the middle rows, earned solid grades, and graduated without anyone really noticing. She had joined the army not out of patriotic fervor or family tradition, but because it seemed like a practical choice. Structure, purpose, a paycheck, and the GI Bill for college afterward. Her military occupational specialty was communications, which suited her perfectly. She could spend hours monitoring radio frequencies, maintaining equipment, and ensuring that vital information flowed seamlessly between units. It was important work, but it kept her in the background where she was comfortable. The barracks were quieter now. Some soldiers were at movie night, others had gone to the gym or were playing cards in the recreation tent. Elena appreciated these evening hours when the constant buzz of activity died down to a manageable hum. She sat on her narrow bunk and opened a worn paperback novel, the same one she had been reading for weeks. The words blurred together as her mind wandered to the letter she had received that morning. Her mother had written about the neighbor's wedding, her sister's new job at the bank, and the weather back home. Normal, everyday things that felt surreal from this place where the sound of helicopters and distant explosions had become background noise. "You doing okay, Rodriguez?" Elena looked up to see Specialist Martinez standing by her bunk. Maria Martinez was one of the few other women in their unit, a mechanic from Texas who had tried multiple times to include Elena in social activities. "Yeah, just tired," Elena replied, closing her book. "You sure? You seem kind of distant lately." "Well, more distant than usual." Martinez sat down on the edge of the bunk across from Elena's. "Want to talk about it?" Elena appreciated the gesture, but talking had never been easy for her. How could she explain that she felt like she was watching her own life from the outside, like she was a character in someone else's story? How could she tell Martinez that sometimes she felt so disconnected from everything that she wondered if anyone would notice if she simply vanished? "I'm fine, really. Just processing everything, you know?" Martinez nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, if you ever want to grab coffee or anything, let me know. It can get lonely out here." After Martinez left, Elena lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Lonely. The word echoed in her mind. She had been surrounded by people her entire life, family, classmates, fellow soldiers, yet loneliness had been her constant companion. It wasn't that people were unkind to her. They simply seemed to look through her, as if she existed in a slightly different dimension. The next morning brought the usual routine. Reveille at 0530, PT, chow, and then work assignments. Elena made her way to the communications bunker, a reinforced concrete structure that housed the base's radio equipment and satellite uplinks. This was her domain, the one place where she felt truly competent and necessary. Sergeant First Class Thompson was already there, checking equipment logs. He was a career soldier in his 40s, gruff but fair. Elena respected him because he never asked her to be anything other than what she was, a reliable communications specialist who did her job well. Morning, Rodriguez. We've got a busy day ahead. 3rd Battalion is conducting operations in the Helmand province, and we need to maintain constant contact. You'll be on the primary frequency. Elena nodded and settled into her station. The radio crackled to life as units across the region checked in. She monitored multiple channels simultaneously, her trained ear picking up subtle changes in tone that might indicate trouble. This was work that mattered, work that could save lives. Hours passed in focused concentration. Elena tracked convoy movements, relayed intelligence reports, and coordinated medical evacuations. The outside world faded away, replaced by the steady rhythm of military communications. Here, she wasn't invisible. She was a vital link in a chain that connected soldiers across hundreds of miles of dangerous terrain. Around midday, an urgent transmission came through on the emergency frequency. A patrol had been hit by an IED, and casualties were mounting. Elena's hands moved quickly across her equipment, establishing contact with the nearest medical unit and guiding a helicopter to the coordinates. This is Dustoff 7-2, we have visual on your position. Popping smoke for identification. Roger, Dustoff 7-2. Smoke is yellow, I say again, yellow smoke. Elena coordinated the evacuation with practiced efficiency, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos she could hear in the background. When the wounded soldiers were finally airborne and en route to the field hospital, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had done good work today. That evening, word came down that all the wounded had survived. Elena felt a quiet pride in knowing she had played a part in that outcome, even if no one would remember her specific contribution. She was content to be a cog in the machine, as long as it was an important cog. But, as the days blended into weeks, Elena began to notice changes in herself. The isolation that had once felt comfortable now seemed heavier, more oppressive. She watched other soldiers form bonds, share jokes, and create makeshift families within their unit. She wanted to be part of that warmth and connection, but every attempt felt forced and awkward. During mess hall conversations, she would formulate responses to jokes or comments, but by the time she worked up the courage to speak, the moment had passed. In group activities, she remained on the periphery, contributing when asked but never volunteering her thoughts or opinions. She began to feel like a ghost haunting her own life. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult week when the base came under mortar attack 3 nights in succession. Elena spent those nights in the communications bunker, maintaining contact with surrounding units while explosions shook the ground above them. The stress was enormous, but she handled it with her usual quiet competence. After the attack stopped and the all-clear was given, Elena emerged from the bunker to find her fellow soldiers embracing, checking on each other, and sharing nervous laughter born of relief. She stood watching them, feeling like she was separated by an invisible wall. No one looked for her in the crowd. No one asked if she was okay. That night, lying in her bunk while others talked about the attacks in hushed voices, Elena felt a profound sadness settle over her. She had convinced herself that being alone was a choice, that she preferred the quiet solitude. But now she realized it wasn't preference, it was fear. Fear of being rejected, of being found wanting, of being told that she didn't belong. She thought about her grandmother's words about stars, about having a place in the sky. Maybe some stars weren't meant to shine bright and bold. Maybe some were destined to glow quietly in the distance, noticed only by those who took the time to really look. As she drifted off to sleep, Elena didn't know that her call sign was already known in places she had never been, to people she had never met. She didn't know that her voice, which she thought went unnoticed, had guided more successful missions than any other communications specialist in her battalion. She didn't know that her quiet competence had earned her a reputation among field commanders as someone they could depend on when everything else fell apart. She thought she was alone, invisible, unremarkable. She had no idea that she was about to discover just how wrong she was, and how much her steady, quiet presence had meant to people she had never seen but who had trusted her voice to guide them home. The helicopter appeared on the horizon just after sunrise, its rotors cutting through the morning air with military precision. Elena watched from the communications bunker window as the aircraft approached forward operating base Meridian, noting the distinctive markings that identified it as a command transport. Such visits usually meant inspections, briefings, or the arrival of high-ranking officials. She turned back to her radio station, adjusting her headset as routine transmissions continued to flow through the channels. 3 weeks had passed since the mortar attacks, and life on the base had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Elena had thrown herself even deeper into her work, finding solace in the predictable patterns of military communications. "Rodriguez, finish up what you're doing," Sergeant Thompson called from across the bunker. "We've got brass coming in for some kind of visit. Colonel wants all comm personnel to stand by for a briefing at 1100 hours." Elena glanced at the clock. She had an hour to complete her morning equipment checks and prepare for whatever presentation awaited them. She wondered what high-ranking officer had decided to inspect their remote outpost. Generals rarely visited forward operating bases unless something significant was happening. The briefing took place in the base's main conference room, a modest space with folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a projection screen. Elena took a seat in the back, as was her habit, while other communications personnel filed in around her. The room buzzed with quiet speculation about the purpose of the gathering. Colonel Hayes entered first, his expression serious but not grim. Behind him walked a man Elena recognized from photographs and news reports, Major General Robert Caldwell, a decorated combat veteran known for his direct leadership style and his commitment to recognizing excellence in the field. Elena had read about his service record during officer candidate school preparation materials, though she had never seriously considered pursuing a commission herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes began, "General Caldwell has made a special trip here today for a specific purpose." "I'll let him explain." General Caldwell stepped forward, his presence filling the room with an authority that came from decades of military service. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of countless deployments and difficult decisions. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. "I want to talk to you about something that doesn't get enough attention in our military," he said, his eyes scanning the assembled soldiers. "We spend a lot of time celebrating heroic actions, the soldier who charges a machine gun nest, the medic who runs into fire to save a wounded comrade, the pilot who lands a damaged aircraft against all odds. These are important stories, and they deserve to be told." Elena shifted slightly in her seat, wondering where this was leading. "But today I want to talk about a different kind of heroism. The kind that happens in the background, in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. The kind of excellence that doesn't make headlines but saves lives every single day." The general paused, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small notebook. Elena noticed his hands, steady despite what must have been countless high-pressure situations. 2 months ago, during Operation Iron Shield, a reconnaissance patrol encountered heavy enemy resistance in a remote valley about 40 miles from here. The engagement lasted 6 hours, with multiple casualties and constantly changing tactical situations. Throughout that entire firefight, one voice remained constant on the radio. Calm, professional, reliable. That voice coordinated medical evacuations, guided supply drops, and maintained communication links that kept those soldiers connected to support. Elena felt a strange flutter in her stomach. Something about the general's tone suggested this story was heading in a direction she hadn't expected. The patrol leader later told me that voice was like a lighthouse in a storm. When everything else was chaos, when the noise of battle made it hard to think, that voice cut through the confusion and provided the guidance they needed to complete their mission and bring everyone home. General Caldwell opened his notebook and read from it. Radio call sign Falcon 77. For 6 hours, this communications specialist maintained contact with multiple units, coordinated complex logistics under enemy fire, and demonstrated the kind of professional competence that represents the best of our military communications corps. Elena's heart began to race. Falcon 77 was her call sign. "But that's not the only incident," the general continued. Over the past 3 months, the same operator has been involved in dozens of successful missions. Convoy escorts through hostile territory. Search and rescue operations. Complex joint operations involving multiple services. Every single mission leader I've spoken with mentions the same thing. When Falcon 77 was on the radio, they knew they had reliable communication support. The room was completely quiet now. Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. This couldn't be right. She was just doing her job, following procedures, staying in the background where she belonged. "I've read the after-action reports," General Caldwell said, his voice growing stronger. "I've interviewed patrol leaders, company commanders, and medical personnel. The consensus is remarkable. This communications specialist has contributed to the success of more combat operations than any other radio operator in the theater. Not through dramatic heroics, but through consistent, professional excellence under pressure." Elena felt the world tilting around her. People were starting to turn in their seats, looking around the room with curious expressions. Some seemed to be putting pieces together, remembering her call sign from various operations. "Which brings me to the reason for my visit today," the general said, closing his notebook and looking directly into the assembled group. "I came here to meet Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, call sign Falcon 77, and to thank her personally for service that exemplifies the best traditions of the United States Army." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and, for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. This couldn't be happening. She was the invisible one, the background soldier who did her job quietly and competently but never stood out. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, would you please stand?" Elena's legs felt like water, but somehow she managed to rise from her chair. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She could feel her face burning with a combination of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite identify. General Caldwell's expression softened as he looked at her. "There she is," he said with genuine warmth. "The voice that's guided so many of our soldiers through dangerous missions." Elena opened her mouth to speak but found no words. She had prepared for many scenarios during her military service, but this moment had never been among them. "I know this probably comes as a surprise," the general continued, addressing her directly now. "In my experience, the best soldiers are often the most surprised when their excellence is recognized. They're so focused on doing the job that they don't realize the impact they're having on others." Colonel Hayes stepped forward with a small wooden box in his hands. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, by order of the Secretary of the Army, you are hereby awarded the Army Commendation Medal for exceptionally meritorious service during combat operations in Afghanistan. Your professional competence and dedication to duty have directly contributed to the success of numerous missions and the safety of American forces throughout this theater of operations." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She had watched other soldiers receive awards and decorations, always from a distance, never imagining herself in such a position. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on her shoulders. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand something," General Caldwell said, stepping closer. "What you do matters. Every clear transmission, every calm response under pressure, every piece of vital information you pass along, it all matters. You may think you're just a voice on the radio, but, to the soldiers in the field, you're much more than that. You're their lifeline." Elena accepted the metal box with hands that trembled slightly. Around her, she could hear the quiet sounds of approval from her fellow soldiers, murmurs of "well done" and scattered applause. For the first time in her life, she was the center of attention, and it felt both terrifying and strangely wonderful. "I have one more thing to share," the general said, raising his hand for quiet. "I received a letter yesterday from Captain Michael Santos, the patrol leader from Operation Iron Shield. He specifically asked me to convey a message to Falcon 77. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and began to read. Dear Falcon 77, I don't know your real name or what you look like, but I wanted you to know that your voice was the thing that held my team together during the worst day of our deployment. When the bullets were flying and my radio operator was wounded, hearing your calm, professional guidance helped me make the decisions that brought my soldiers home alive. I will never forget what you did for us. Thank you. The room erupted in applause, and Elena felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. She thought about Captain Santos and his team, soldiers she had never seen but whose voices she remembered clearly from that chaotic day. She had been so focused on following procedures and maintaining communications that she hadn't fully grasped the human impact of her actions. As the applause died down, General Caldwell spoke once more. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you represent something important that I want everyone in this room to remember. Excellence doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it speaks quietly, steadily, consistently. Sometimes the most important contributions come from those who think they're just doing their jobs. After the ceremony, Elena found herself surrounded by fellow soldiers offering congratulations and sharing stories she had never heard. Specialist Martinez appeared at her elbow with a huge grin. I knew there was something special about you, Maria said. You always seemed so focused, so professional. Now I know why. Corporal Jenkins approached with several other soldiers from the motor pool. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I always thought you were just really quiet, maybe not interested in hanging out with us. I didn't realize you were the legendary Falcon 77. Half the guys in my unit have stories about your radio work. Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention, but also something else, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. These soldiers weren't looking through her anymore. They were seeing her, really seeing her, perhaps for the first time. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Elena made her way back to the communications bunker. The familiar equipment and routine procedures offered comfort after the emotional intensity of the morning. But something fundamental had changed. The work was the same, but her understanding of its importance had transformed completely. She put on her headset and began monitoring the afternoon traffic, but now she listened with different ears. Each transmission represented real people in real situations who depended on her skill and professionalism. She wasn't just a cog in the machine, she was a vital connection that held the entire network together. That evening, Elena sat outside the barracks looking up at the star-filled sky. Her grandmother's words came back to her with new meaning. Every star has a story. Some shine bright and bold, others glow quiet and steady. Both have their place in the sky. For the first time, Elena understood that quiet and steady could be just as important as bright and bold. Her light had been shining all along, she just hadn't realized that others could see it. The days following General Caldwell's visit brought changes Elena hadn't anticipated. The medal sat in its presentation box on her small bedside table, catching the light whenever she opened it. But the real transformation was happening around her, in the way people interacted with her, spoke to her, included her in conversations that had previously flowed past her like water around a stone. Elena discovered that recognition, while gratifying, came with its own challenges. She had spent her entire life perfecting the art of invisibility, and, suddenly, being visible felt like learning to walk all over again. Every interaction required conscious effort, every social situation demanded that she step outside the comfortable boundaries she had built around herself. Rodriguez, you joining us for chow? Corporal Jenkins called out as she emerged from the communications bunker after her morning shift. The question was casual, but Elena could hear something different in his tone, genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Sure, she replied, surprised by her own response. A week ago, she would have declined with her usual maybe next time. But something about the general's words, about understanding the impact of her work, had shifted something fundamental in her approach to connecting with others. The mess hall buzzed with the usual mixture of conversations, complaints about the food, and tired laughter that characterized military life in a forward deployment. Elena followed Jenkins to a table where several other soldiers were already seated, including Maria Martinez, Sergeant Peterson from the motor pool, and Private Collins, a young medic who couldn't be more than 19 years old. So Rodriguez, Peterson said as she sat down with her tray, I heard you were the one who guided my convoy through that sandstorm last month. We couldn't see 10 feet in front of us, but your directions got us to the checkpoint right on schedule. Elena nodded, remembering the incident. The GPS coordinates were clear, and I had radar tracking from the tower. It wasn't that complicated. Maybe not for you, Peterson laughed. But, from where I was sitting, it felt like having a guardian angel on the radio. My driver was about ready to pull over and wait it out, but your voice kept us moving. Private Collins leaned forward with interest. Your Falcon 77? I've heard about you from the medics. They say you coordinate the smoothest medevac operations they've ever seen. Last week, when that IED hit 1st Platoon, the evacuation went like clockwork because of your communication support. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks. She was still adjusting to being the subject of conversation rather than an observer of it. I just followed standard procedures. The medics and flight crews did the real work. That's the thing about good communications, Martinez interjected. When it's done right, it looks easy. But we all know the difference between having reliable support and trying to operate without it. The conversation continued around the table, with soldiers sharing stories and experiences Elena had never heard before. She learned that her call sign had become something of a legend among various units that operated in their sector. Patrol leaders specifically requested her for complex missions. Flight crews mentioned her professionalism in their reports. Medical personnel praised her ability to coordinate evacuations under pressure. As she listened to these accounts, Elena began to understand something important. Her perception of her own invisibility had been shaped by her focus on avoiding attention rather than on the impact she was having. She had been so concerned with staying in the background that she had missed the ways her work connected her to hundreds of other soldiers across the theater of operations. After lunch, Elena walked back to the communications center with Martinez, who had been trying to draw her into social activities for months. I want to ask you something, Maria said as they approached the bunker. We're putting together a care package for Johnson's family back home. His wife just had a baby, and we thought it would be nice to send some photos and letters from his unit. Would you write something? I think it would mean a lot coming from someone with your reputation. Elena stopped walking. My reputation? You really don't get it, do you? Martinez smiled. Elena, you're probably the most respected communications specialist on this base. Maybe in this whole sector. When soldiers talk about reliable support, your name comes up constantly. You've earned something that's really hard to get in the military: universal respect from your peers. That afternoon, Elena sat at her radio station with new awareness of her role in the broader mission. Every transmission felt different now that she understood how her voice was received by the soldiers who depended on her guidance. She began to pay attention not just to the technical aspects of communication but to the human elements as well. When a convoy reported mechanical problems in a potentially hostile area, Elena didn't just relay coordinates for repair support, she stayed on the radio with them, providing regular situation updates and maintaining contact until the vehicles were operational again. When a forward observation post called in suspicious activity, she coordinated not just the immediate response but followed up to ensure the situation was resolved and the outpost felt secure. The changes in her approach didn't go unnoticed. Sergeant Thompson, her supervisor, called her aside at the end of her shift. Rodriguez, I've been watching you work for months, and something's different these past few days. Your technical skills were always excellent, but now there's something else. More engagement, more initiative. What changed? Elena considered the question carefully. I think I finally understood that communications isn't just about passing information. It's about connecting people. When someone calls on the radio, they're not just requesting data, they're reaching out for support, for guidance, for reassurance that they're not alone out there. Thompson nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. The best communications specialists understand that they're not just operating equipment, they're serving as a lifeline for soldiers in the field. You've always had the technical skills. Now you're developing the human touch that separates good operators from exceptional ones. That evening, Elena found herself in an unusual position. Instead of eating dinner alone or making polite conversation before retreating to her barracks, she was genuinely engaged with the group of soldiers around her table. They were discussing a news report about changes in military communications technology, and Elena discovered she had strong opinions about how new systems might affect field operations. The thing is, she said, surprising herself with her willingness to speak up, all the technology in the world doesn't matter if you don't understand the human side of communications. You can have the clearest signal and the most advanced encryption, but if you don't know how to talk to people who are scared, confused, or under fire, you're not really doing your job. The table fell quiet, and Elena worried she had spoken too forcefully. But then, Collins nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I experienced during my first week here, he said. I was terrified during my first real emergency call, and the voice on the radio, which I now know was you, somehow managed to calm me down while giving me clear instructions. It wasn't just what you said, but how you said it. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself stepping into leadership roles she had never sought but somehow felt natural assuming. When new communications personnel arrived at the base, she volunteered to help with their training. When complex multi-unit operations required experienced coordinators, officers specifically requested her involvement. The most significant change came when Colonel Hayes approached her about a special assignment. A joint operation with Special Forces units required a communications specialist with proven experience in coordinating complex, high-stakes missions. The assignment would mean working directly with elite military units and taking responsibility for communications support that could affect strategic operations. I know this is outside your normal duties, the colonel said, but General Caldwell specifically recommended you for this assignment. He believes your skills and temperament are exactly what this mission needs. Elena felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it was mixed with something new, excitement. The shy, invisible soldier who had arrived at the base 6 months earlier would have declined such an assignment out of fear and self-doubt. But the person she was becoming understood that skills developed in quiet competence could be applied to larger challenges. I'd be honored to take the assignment, sir, she said. The mission briefing took place in a secured facility with representatives from multiple military branches. Elena found herself seated at a table with majors, lieutenant colonels, and senior enlisted personnel from Special Forces, Army Aviation, and intelligence units. For someone who had spent her military career in the background, the level of responsibility was intimidating. But, as the mission details unfolded, Elena realized that her experience had prepared her for exactly this type of challenge. The operation involved coordinating communications between ground teams, aviation assets, and command elements across a wide geographic area. Success would depend on seamless information flow and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing situations, precisely the skills she had been developing for months. During the planning phase, Elena contributed ideas and suggestions that impressed the senior officers present. Her deep understanding of radio protocols, her experience with multi-unit coordination, and her ability to remain calm under pressure made her an invaluable team member. Major Harrison, the Special Forces officer leading the ground component, approached her after the briefing. Rodriguez, I've heard good things about your work. This operation is going to be complex, with a lot of moving pieces. I need someone I can count on to keep communications flowing smoothly, no matter what happens. You can count on me, sir, Elena replied, and, for the first time in her life, she said those words with complete confidence in her ability to deliver on the promise. As she prepared for the mission, Elena reflected on the transformation she had undergone. The shy, invisible soldier who had thought she was alone had discovered that she had never been alone at all. Her voice had been a constant presence in the lives of hundreds of fellow soldiers, providing guidance, support, and reliability when they needed it most. She thought about her grandmother's words about stars having their place in the sky. Elena was beginning to understand that her place wasn't in the background after all, it was at the center of a communications network that connected soldiers across vast distances and dangerous terrain. Her quiet competence hadn't made her invisible, it had made her indispensable. The mission was scheduled to begin in 2 days. Elena spent the time conducting equipment checks, reviewing communication protocols, and coordinating with her fellow team members. But, mostly, she thought about the soldiers who would depend on her voice to guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in her military career, Elena Rodriguez was ready to step fully into the light and let her skills shine as brightly as they deserved to. Operation Crosswind began at 0300 hours under a moonless sky. Elena sat in the command vehicle, surrounded by sophisticated communications equipment that would link her to ground teams, aviation assets, and command elements spread across 200 square miles of Afghan terrain. The mission was ambitious, a coordinated strike against a high-value target that required precision timing and flawless communication between multiple military units. As the convoy moved through the darkness toward the staging area, Elena tested each communication channel methodically. Her earpiece crackled with the familiar sounds of military radio traffic, position reports, equipment checks, and the quiet professionalism that characterized Special Operations Forces preparing for action. Falcon 77, this is Razor 6, came the voice of Major Harrison, the ground force commander. Communications check, over. Razor 6, this is Falcon 77. I read you 5 by 5. All nets are active and functioning normally, Elena responded, her voice calm and clear despite the enormity of the responsibility resting on her shoulders. Over the past months, Elena had learned to recognize voices and call signs, building mental pictures of the soldiers she supported even when she never saw their faces. Tonight was different. She would finally meet some of these people in person, putting faces to the voices that had trusted her guidance through countless missions. The staging area was a flurry of controlled activity. Special Forces teams checked their equipment under red-filtered lights that preserved night vision. Helicopter crews conducted final pre-flight inspections. Intelligence officers reviewed satellite imagery and updated target information. In the midst of this organized chaos, Elena established her mobile communications center in an armored vehicle equipped with powerful radio transmitters and satellite uplinks. Major Harrison approached her position, followed by a soldier Elena didn't immediately recognize. In the dim light, she could see that the major was younger than his voice had suggested, probably in his early 30s, with the lean build and confident bearing that marked experienced Special Forces officers. Rodriguez, I want you to meet Sergeant First Class Davies, Harrison said. He's the team leader for Bravo Squad, one of the ground elements you'll be supporting tonight. Elena looked at Davies more closely and felt a shock of recognition. She knew that voice from a dozen missions over the past several months, but she had never imagined what the man behind it looked like. Davies was in his 40s, with prematurely gray hair and scars on his hands that spoke of years in combat zones. Falcon 77, Davies said with a broad smile. It's about time we met face to face. Your voice has been my guardian angel more times than I can count. Elena felt the familiar heat of embarrassment, but it was mixed with pride now. Thank you, Sergeant. I've always appreciated how professional your team is on the radio. It makes my job much easier. Professional? Davies laughed. Lady, you've talked us through situations where we were anything but professional. Remember that ambush in Wardak province 2 months ago? My radio operator was wounded. I was trying to coordinate a fighting withdrawal with one hand while shooting with the other, and your voice was the only thing keeping me oriented. You probably saved my entire team that day. Elena remembered the incident vividly. She had maintained contact with Davies' team for over an hour while they fought their way out of an enemy ambush, coordinating air support and medical evacuation while tracking their movement across hostile territory. She had stayed on the radio long past the end of her scheduled shift, unwilling to break contact until she knew they were safe. I was just doing my job, Elena said, but the words felt inadequate even as she spoke them. No, Davies replied, his expression growing serious. You were doing much more than that. You were being our lifeline. There's a difference. As the final mission briefing began, Elena took her position at the communications console. Around her, she could see the faces of soldiers she had supported through months of dangerous operations. For the first time, she truly understood the human cost of communication failures and the vital importance of her role in keeping these people safe. The mission unfolded with the precision that marked well-planned special operations. Elena coordinated the movement of ground teams across rugged terrain, guided helicopter insertions to precise landing zones, and maintained constant contact with command elements tracking the operation from multiple locations. Her voice became the thread that wove together a complex tapestry of coordinated military action. Falcon 77, this is Raven Flight, called the lead pilot of the aviation element. We're approaching the objective area. Ground teams are in position. Request final clearance. Elena checked her coordination boards, confirmed that all elements were ready, and received approval from the mission commander. Raven Flight, you are cleared hot. All ground elements are marking their positions with infrared strobes. The next hour tested every skill Elena had developed during her military career. The target area proved to be more heavily defended than intelligence had indicated, requiring constant adjustments to the original plan. Ground teams maneuvered through unexpected resistance while aviation assets provided close support. Medical evacuation became necessary when one soldier was wounded by small arms fire. Throughout the chaos, Elena's voice remained the constant that held the operation together. She tracked the position of every friendly unit, coordinated fire support missions, and guided medical helicopters to casualty collection points. When communication equipment failed on one of the ground teams, she established alternate communication paths that kept them connected to the larger force. Falcon 77, this is Razor 6, Major Harrison called during the most intense phase of the fighting. We've got wounded and need immediate extraction. Can you coordinate a landing zone for medical evacuation? Elena quickly analyzed the tactical situation, identified a suitable landing area, and began the complex process of coordinating a medical evacuation under fire. She guided the helicopter crew to the exact location while simultaneously directing suppressive fire that would cover their approach and departure. Dustoff 2-3, this is Falcon 77. Your landing zone is marked with green smoke. Approach from the west to avoid enemy fire. Ground team will have casualties ready for immediate loading. The evacuation proceeded flawlessly, with wounded soldiers receiving medical care within minutes of being injured. As the medical helicopter disappeared into the darkness, Elena heard Major Harrison's voice on the radio. Outstanding work, Falcon 77. That coordination saved lives tonight. The mission concluded successfully just before dawn. The high-value target had been captured, all friendly forces had been extracted safely, and the wounded soldier was stable and receiving treatment at a medical facility. As the convoy returned to base, Elena felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond professional accomplishment. During the debriefing that followed, Elena found herself seated among senior officers and experienced Special Forces personnel who treated her as an equal partner in the mission's success. Colonel Matthews, the overall mission commander, specifically praised her communication support. The success of this operation depended entirely on seamless coordination between multiple elements, he said. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez provided exactly the kind of professional communications support that makes complex missions possible. Her performance tonight exemplifies the critical importance of expert communications personnel in special operations. After the official debriefing, Elena found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to thank her personally. Sergeant Davies approached with several members of his team. Rodriguez, I want you to meet my guys, he said. This is Corporal Watson, my medic, and Specialist Freeman, our demolitions expert. They've all heard your voice dozens of times, but they wanted to meet you in person. Watson, a quiet soldier with serious eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. Every time I've called for medical evacuation support, your voice has been there guiding us through. You've helped me save lives, and I'll never forget that. Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She had spent so much of her life feeling disconnected from the people around her, never realizing that her work had created profound connections with soldiers she had never met. Over the following days, word of Elena's performance during Operation Crosswind spread throughout the base and beyond. She received commendations from multiple unit commanders and was recommended for additional specialized training that would prepare her for even more complex communication challenges. But the most meaningful recognition came in quieter moments. Soldiers approached her in the mess hall to share stories of missions where her voice had guided them through difficult situations. New communications personnel sought her out for advice and training. Officers included her in planning sessions for future operations. Elena realized that her transformation was complete not when she received medals or commendations, but when she truly understood the network of relationships her work had created. She had never been alone or invisible, she had been the central node in a communications web that connected hundreds of soldiers across vast distances and dangerous terrain. 2 weeks after Operation Crosswind, Elena received orders for a new assignment. She had been selected to attend the Army's Advanced Communications School, where she would train for positions requiring the highest levels of technical skill and leadership responsibility. The assignment was recognition of her exceptional performance and an invitation to take on even greater challenges. As she prepared to leave Forward Operating Base Meridian, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The shy, invisible soldier who had arrived months earlier believing she was alone had discovered that she had never been alone at all. Her voice had been a constant presence in the lives of countless fellow soldiers, providing guidance, support, and reassurance when they needed it most. Maria Martinez found her packing her equipment on the final evening. "I'm going to miss having you around," Maria said. "You changed this place, you know. Before General Caldwell's visit, you were this mysterious, competent person that everyone respected but nobody really knew. Afterward, you became someone we could all learn from." Elena folded her uniform carefully, thinking about Maria's words. "I think it was the other way around. Everyone else changed me. You, Jenkins, Davies, all the soldiers I talked to on the radio, you all helped me understand that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible, and that doing your job well is its own form of leadership." On her last night, Elena walked outside the barracks to look up at the star-filled sky one final time. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory, "Every star has a story. Some shine bright and bold, others glow quiet and steady. Both have their place in the sky." Elena had finally found her place. She had learned that quiet competence could be just as powerful as dramatic heroism, that steady reliability could be just as important as bold action. Her light had been shining all along, she had just needed to understand that others could see it. As she prepared for sleep, Elena thought about the soldiers she would support in her new assignment, the voices she would guide through future challenges, and the connections she would build through the simple act of being reliably, professionally, compassionately present when others needed her most. She had thought she was alone, but she had never been alone. Her voice had been a beacon for others, and, in learning to see herself through their eyes, she had discovered the light she had always carried within herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new voices to guide, and new opportunities to serve as a lifeline for soldiers who would depend on her calm professionalism in their darkest moments. Elena Rodriguez, call sign Falcon 77, closed her eyes and smiled. She was ready for whatever came next, confident in her abilities and secure in the knowledge that she belonged exactly where she was, at the center of a network of trust, competence, and human connection that stretched far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible.